Okay. This is really it. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for what we believe will be a very special treat to our community. Greater New Haven's own Dan Oren, who has graciously agreed to share with us his knowledge and expertise in the field of Jewish genealogy. And I'm sure you'll enjoy the program, but before we begin, let me tell you for a couple of minutes a little bit about our organization. I'm Michael Dimenstein. I'm the president of the Jewish Historical Society of Greater New Haven. We have been around this is our 48th year, and we have the mission of collecting and publishing, preserving, and providing to the community primary source materials that serve, where we serve as a central repository for the documents that are used in research and education on the history of the Jewish community in New Haven. From its humble beginning in 1976 as a grassroots organization founded by members of our community, including our first president, Harvey Layden, of blessed memory, who began storing our holdings in his attic and his basement. We've now become a major component of the Ethnic Heritage Center at Southern Connecticut State University. In addition to our having published Jews in New Haven, a 10-volume set of writings, interviews, and photographs, we've recorded and preserved hundreds of oral histories, provided materials to researchers from across North and South America, Europe, and Israel, and have presented many educational and cultural programs to audiences of all ages and backgrounds. With the generous funding of the Jewish Foundation of Greater New Haven, we've obtained the archival preservation, we've obtained the collection, the documents and artifacts of the former Jewish Home for the Aged, and we have taken custody of them and are preserving them. And in fact, the archivist who has done that for us is Jake Griffith Rosenberger, who is to my left. Last year, we introduced the annual Judith Schiff Women's History Program in collaboration with the New Haven Museum. And we're delighted to be presenting next month, and please mark your calendars, on Sunday, March 3rd at 2 p.m. at the New Haven Museum. We will be presenting a tribute to the illustrious career of Laurel Vlock, local radio and TV personality and award-winning documentary filmmaker, whose pioneering video recordings of Holocaust survivor testimonies became the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies at Yale. Today's program is part of the Judaica Project series made possible in part by a generous grant from the Jewish Federation of Greater New Haven. What we've learned about Judaica is that every article has a story, and usually that story is related to the owner's family. Today we're going to learn about how to capture that family history. And at this time I'd like to invite Adele Messina, a member of our board, who will have the honor of introducing our speaker. Adele? And while she's coming up here, I just want to mention, if you haven't already joined the Jewish Historical Society, we have membership forms on the table as you came in. I have more. We really would like to encourage you to join and support the organization. We are the only ones who do what we do for this community. Yeah.
I am not as tall as Michael. Can you hear me?
You need to speak closer to it.
Now can you hear me? Yes. Okay. When Michael asked me if I'd introduce Dan this morning, I thought, what can I tell you that wasn't already written in his bio on the Jewish Historical Society flyer? So if you haven't read it, I'm going to read it to you quickly. He's the author of The Wedding Photo, A Family Genealogical History, and Joining the Club, A History of Jews in Yale. He's a former program chair of the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies annual conference and the founder and president of Friends of Jewish Heritage in Poland, a nonprofit organization. He is co-leader of the annual JewishGen Future Scholars Fellows and JewishGen Neshama trips to Poland. He's a life member of the Historical Society and has been a member since the organization's founding. If any of you here today, now I know Michael just asked you, but I'm going to repeat it. If any of you here aren't members yet, please consider joining. There are materials available. I can add from personal knowledge that in addition to his expertise in psychiatry and genealogy, he also has extensive and excellent talent as an amateur travel agent, and he chants a mean Haftorah. And then I went to the internet looking for additional information. I freely admit that my research was not of thesis or dissertation quality. Maybe it was the caliber of a freshman year run-of-the-mill research paper. In spite of that, I can add, I think with certainty, Dan, verify me if I'm wrong, that he was born in Wisconsin, received both his BS and his MD at Yale, worked at both Yale and the National Institute of Mental Health at a university in Poland whose name I won't even attempt to pronounce, and written numerous scientific articles. I can also confidently tell you that he was not born in Tel Aviv in 1955. He was not a child prodigy who studied cello, piano, and singing, and at age 13 was selected by Leonard Bernstein to be the treble soloist for one of his pieces. He did not become a conductor who performed throughout Europe. All of that was done by Daniel Oren. The reason I know that he's Dan and not Daniel is because one time I was calling him up for an aliyah at Shul, and I asked him if his name was Daniel, and he told me, no, it's Don. So I knew that. He also did not study martial arts, go to a military boarding school. He was not a wildlife photographer, a CEO in the computer software industry, or the president CEO of Dexel Pharma Ltd. And all of those were Dan Orens. Did you know there are 19 Dan Orens in the US and on LinkedIn? And so that's not going outside of the US or beyond. So given the challenges I faced in trying to find information about my subject, a living individual with a pretty high profile, I was left feeling a bit skeptical and defeated about how successful I might be in trying to find information about my family. I know little to nothing about them. My father, whose grandparents were from Russia, used to say that his father was from Shmagon. My father was known for telling stories a bit, and we just always thought he made the place up, that it doesn't even exist. I do, however, have knowledge and faith in our presenter. He's intelligent, witty, doggedly determined, and he's been amazingly successful in researching his own family history. It's therefore with great pleasure and high hopes that I invite this Dan Oren to share his knowledge and teach the rest of us how to do it. And if you haven't yet silenced or turned off your phones, please do so now. Take it away.
Thank you, my friend Adele. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. This group has meant a lot to me over the past 48 years of my life and its existence. And I want to thank you for everything that you do as individuals for the society and that you do as a group. Louder. Okay. Thank you for everything that you do as a group for protecting the history of this Jewish community. I have gained from it immensely over the years. And I'll just give a couple disclaimers at first. Although I am not a professionally trained historian, nor am I a professionally trained or certified genealogist, and I know I'm in the presence of, for sure, some professional historians with an academic degree to support it. There may be some of you who are professional genealogists. I am none of those, but anything good that I share with you is from what professional historians and genealogists have taught to me. And by being an amateur at both of these, I hope will give some inspiration to each of you, because genealogy is something that each one of us can do. That Michael used the line about stories. Don Cohen, the late psychiatrist who lived here in New Haven, a child psychiatrist, and a teacher of mine, he used to say, everyone has a story. And that really is true. Every single one of us, every part of our family, everyone has a story. And finding genealogy for me has always been It starts out with names, dates, vital statistics, which are critical things in order to find out about people you don't know. But when they lead to stories, it's a bonus. A couple other introductory points. With regard to this organization, again, I thank you for doing what you're doing. One of the things that when I began my own genealogy in 1976, the same time that this organization was founded, having an organization like this that was interested in local history was really very, very supportive and very meaningful. So keep supporting each other and keep supporting others. What I want to point out first, I have my email address on there, so you can feel free to contact me afterwards with questions. The short version, I have several different ones, but this is the shortest one that works. DOREN@fjhp.org, Friends of Jewish Heritage in Poland.org. That's the organization Adele mentioned. I'm the volunteer chair of that. I'm going to list a bunch of websites during this presentation. You don't have to bother, no one needs to bother with writing anything down unless you want to. All you need to know is one website. Since it's being recorded, I presume it'll be available through the Society's website. But if you remember Rimmen Press, Rimmen is spelled like Rimmen Road, here just down the block, R-I-M-M-O-N, rimmenpress.com/New Haven. If you go to that website, all of the websites that I'm going to refer to in this talk are listed there, so you don't have to bother to copy it down here. I should say that for me, I mentioned 1976. My interest in genealogy really began out of a history project that I was working on at the time. I was taking a course in American Jewish history at Yale, and I was trying to figure out who the first Jewish students at Yale were. And part of that, because in the early days of America, there was only a handful of Jews, if you will, in the early years of this country. And because there were only a handful of men, and there weren't so many Jewish women to marry. So one question was, who was marrying whom? Were the first people of Jewish background? Did they consider themselves Jewish? Were they considered by others to be Jewish? And I worked on the genealogy of the Pinto family, who was based in Derby and went to Yale. And at one point when I had studied their genealogy, something hit me on the head. I realized, Dan, you know a lot more about the genealogy of this Pinto family than you know about your own. And let's learn something about yourself. So this is about what I've been working on. I should say, so in terms of the Society, I had the privilege of being one of the 13 authors of the very first volume of the 10-volume Jews in New Haven set, edited by Jonathan Sarnow. Prior to this meeting, I just did some research, because this was almost 50 years ago. So of the 13 authors, 9 are deceased, 3 that, including me, are living, and it's good to be, I'm sure all of us say this, it's good to be alive. One of them I haven't been able to trace, but one of you may know if they're around or not. So I hope to be back again, maybe in a future year, and still be among the living. So let me give a trigger warning. We live in a society now where in many classrooms, if you're going to say anything controversial, you have to warn everybody, uh-oh, be careful, we're going to say something controversial. I'm not going to hide anything, but the trigger warning that I want to give each of you, if you haven't started doing genealogy yet, this is a picture of pills and getting addicted. Genealogy is addictive, okay? You heard it here first, okay? It is something that it is hard to stop, but look, we all need things in life. We all need to eat. We all need to drink. I consider genealogy to be a healthy addiction, so, but at least consider yourself warned. So here's today's agenda. What I hope more than the details is to encourage you to think like a Jewish genealogist, some ideas about how to prepare basic family records, something about the scientific method, which is really being a good historian, being a good genealogist, something about using electronics to prepare, identifying key relatives, a little bit about doing interviews, dealing with brick walls, because when you study anything, you will run into a brick wall at some point. And A little bit about DNA, because we hear about the use of DNA in genealogy all the time, and a little bit about the Jewish genealogical community. So this is my family. I'm able to trace it back to the first recorded ancestors, Adam and Eve. And if you look through the biblical sources, you can go through about 10, 15, 20 generations down till you get to Abraham. It's then traced down through another several generations to my ancestors and probably many of your ancestors, Levi and Judah. Unfortunately, the trail beyond that gets a little murky, and so I haven't quite been able to connect myself back to there. So I'm not going to focus on that end of the genealogy and more on the verifiable end. So step one, think like a Jewish genealogist. What do I mean by that? So this is a photo of me in Kozmin, Wielkopolski, Poland, last April, standing in front of a Jewish cemetery in Poland. This is a cemetery was in formerly Prussia. Now it's part of Poland, and as you can see by the tombstones there, it's in very well-preserved shape. And part of why it's in fact, the biggest reason why it's in so well-preserved shape are two. One, the Germans did not destroy it during the war. Two, the Poles did not destroy it after the war. And three, there is an amazing Polish Christian volunteer who has organized a local historical society that keeps this cemetery as meticulously clean as anyone could hope for. So this is me. He took me to see this cemetery last April. And if you look inside the cemetery, and this is really about thinking, if you look behind here, you can see the tombstones as you come in through the entrance. You're at a distance, but can anybody make an observation about at least the front tombstone? Let me see. These are all what you read on there. Can you read anything? That's the question. There is no writing there. That was a trick question. But what I want you to do, and when I say think like a genealogist, and this is think like a historian, think like a researcher, always be asking yourself, what is right with this picture? What doesn't make sense? Because if you can try, sometimes figuring out what doesn't make sense will teach you that either you're on a wrong path or it has some kind of meaning. You go inside the cemetery. In fact, I drew out these rectangles, or these in front of each tombstone, and this shows you how in this cemetery where the bodies are buried relative to the tombstone. So you can see from the direction this photograph was taken, the tombstones are all vertical. The bodies are laid out so that they're in front of these blank tombstones. Makes no sense. This is just a drawing of what one of these tombstones looks like. The body buried at the bottom, the back of the tombstone. And in fact, this is a drawing of the arrangement of the cemetery, all the tombstones like that. And then if you go to the back side of the tombstone, there you can read all the text that you would expect. This is Prussia, so here the text on one side is German, and the language on the bottom is Hebrew, which was for one point in time, the characteristic way that they carved the tombstones there. If you were to look at a map of the cemetery, so here the entrance would be at the top of the slide, the bodies are buried facing the entrance, the tombstones I wrote the letters Pain Nun, which means Ponik Bar, here is buried, here is interred. So all the tombstones in this cemetery, the information is on the back side of the grave. And if you were to look at the directions, if you were to put a compass on this tombstone, you'd see that east is at the top, west is at the bottom, north is to the left, south is to the right. The characteristics, the way that they're buried facing east is very common in Jewish cemeteries. There is a tradition, just like in many synagogues, the ark will face east towards Jerusalem. In many cemeteries, there is a custom to have the body facing east so that when the Messiah comes and our souls are brought back to life, the bodies can easily, conveniently arise from the grave and walk straight to Jerusalem. But still, that doesn't explain why did they put the writing on the back. Anyone want to take a guess? And again, all guesses are good because when you're exploring, when you're doing research, you've got to ask yourself, why? Does it make any sense? Please.
Anything to do with weather conditions?
Anything to do with maybe there's like heavy rains on one side or the sun. You might be right. You might be right. Another guy.
Safety, so someone would know that it was a Jewish cemetery if they just happened by.
Oh, so if they were passing by, they wouldn't know it was a Jewish cemetery. That's quite possible. I will tell you, I don't know the answer because whatever written records there were are lost, so we can only speculate. What I do know, though, about Jewish communities in most of the world is that it's hard to hide a cemetery, so that today, you're right, they may not know, but back when there was a living, breathing Jewish community and Jews made up in this town and in many towns in Eastern Europe, 1/3, maybe half the population, everybody would have known it was a Jewish cemetery. But you're right, for today, where nobody goes to that part, there are no Jews there, people might not know. We'll take 2 more guesses and we'll go.
So that when you want to read it, you don't walk on the grave?
If you want to read it, you don't want that. You may be right, and the only thing that I would say, and again, you may be right, but it isn't the custom because, for example, if you go to most Jewish cemeteries around the world, the body is in front. So, but maybe they had, every town is entitled to its own way of doing things. So you might be right. Any other guesses before we move on?
Maybe you're facing east when you read the right.
So you may be right. You may be right. Let me tell you what I think. Oh, please, one more, and then we'll go on.
Do they know how many layers of graves there? So was there first a cemetery which was either destroyed on purpose or by accident, and then eventually tombstones and other graves?
Yeah, there probably would have been an older cemetery in that town, but this is the original cemetery where these stones are buried. Let me tell you what I believe the answer to be, and this is where history is. Here's where history comes to play. I showed you the fence, and I showed you the entrance, and that is that's the way things are today. But back when this was an active cemetery, the historic entrance was down on the west side. So when people came in, the people were buried. This is the argument that I would make. People were buried so that the bodies could, at the end of time, march east. But because everyone's coming into the cemetery, when you go to a cemetery, you're looking for, where is mom buried? Where is Uncle Fred buried? Where is so-and-so buried? If you want to make it convenient for people coming into the cemetery, you make it easy to find it. So my hypothesis would be that historically, since people came in from the west side of the cemetery, by having the names on the west side of the stones, that made it easier to find. But anyway, I'm sharing this anecdote because I want you to, not everything that we see, not everything that's written down makes sense at first, but it's important to consider the options. So there's a wonderful Hebrew word. It's very popular in Israel. It's popular in terms of being talked about. I don't know how often they do it, but the Hebrew word is sablanut, which means patience. So what I want to encourage for each of us is patience. And it's like any research. Sometimes you get lucky and you find some important find the same day. It often takes years and years of not finding, but we live in a world where, as we know with the internet, new things are coming online literally every day. So the same document you may think doesn't exist or isn't available, go back to it. Don't obsess. Don't look at it every day to see, is this there? Go back every few years if you're trying to find out about a certain person. It may have come online. Be patient. Be persistent. Keep trying. Let me show you one example of a case study. I want to highlight really a very special New Haven Jewish resource. One of the people that I interviewed for this very first article in Jews in New Haven was a New Haven physician, Maxwell Lear. He was from the Yale class of 1911, became a noted surgeon in New Haven, and I interviewed him by phone in 1977. And I wanted to find out, in preparing for this talk, where was he buried? Because often the tombstone is a source of good genealogical information, and it's part of a person's story. It turns out New Haven has really a wonderful resource called the New Haven Jewish Cemetery Database. If you haven't used it, I encourage you to do that. Most Jewish communities in the world do not have something like this, so this is really something to be very proud of here. And I'm going to take us through using it to find Maxwell Lear's tombstone. This is the website. Again, it's on the website I gave you. It has the long link to get there. If you type in Maxwell Lear, very quickly it'll come up and you put in the last name Lear, first name Maxwell. It will tell you the date of death was the 30th of June. It has a click link where you can find out what the Hebrew date was, the birth date, August 2nd, 1888. Click and it gives you the Hebrew birth date. And they look at the tombstone and they see it has the parents Samuel and Ida. He happens to be buried in the Congregation B'nai Jacob Cemetery on Jewel Street. And it tells you in what segment even of that cemetery it is. And it gives you a click where you can click to the map. And in fact, for that cemetery, and this is too small to read, but it gives you a full map of that cemetery, all the different locations where everyone buried there is. So if you want to, you could go there and easily find the tombstone yourself. If I zoom in, I said that he's in space A11, which is in the upper left hand. Whaley Avenue is down at the bottom of the screen. Jewel Avenue is on the left. You come in through the Whaley Avenue entrance, and it tells you how to find Maxwell Lear's tombstone. This website also links you to a photograph. The photograph isn't always as good as being there in person, but here it takes you to an actual photo of the tombstone. So I encourage anybody trying to find somebody who you think may have been buried in New Haven, and of course that doesn't mean that they died in New Haven. People will have family plots and may be buried back here. You can find them. Another source that's excellent for Jewish burial sites all around the world is what's called JOBR, the JewishGen Online Worldwide Burial Registry. So I have the website here. If we did the same thing, if we didn't know about the New Haven database, we would put in the surname of Lear in the middle, and it would take you to and you can select what part of the world you're looking for. I know that he's from Connecticut, so it has 36 burial records of members of the Lear family from Connecticut. And we click in, gives a whole list of 36 for simplicity. I'm just showing one of them, and it gives you the same information which you can click to. It has the date of death, the date of birth, the full burial record, and which cemetery he is buried in. And if I were to click through to that, it gives that here, it gives the parents, it gives his spouse's name, Ida, his father's name here, and again, further information about the cemetery. And this is not an absolutely complete burial database, but they are every year adding new burial sites from cemeteries from around the world to make it easier to find people's last resting place. Another case study of sometimes how you can use the internet to learn more about where someone might be buried. Someone in class I was teaching told me that they had an ancestor by the name of Chaya Rivka Strickman who died in 1917. And a cousin of hers had given her this photograph of her ancestor's tombstone. She thought that she would love to know what it says on the tombstone, but she didn't even really know where the tombstone was or what information. So here, one wonderful tool which all of us use for so many things is Google. The internet. It is. I'm not an employee of Google. I don't own stock in Google, but it is an amazing tool that can lead you for information. One trick that I often do is I'm not a paid member of Genie.com. I'll talk about that later. At this moment, I have been in the past. But if you put in the name of someone, so I put Chaya Strickman, and then I put Genie.com, Google will do a whole search of the Genie. Genie is a website, a database for genealogy, and it comes up with, actually the first result happened in this case. You don't always get lucky, but in this case, the first result has an Obadiah Strickman, who died in 1917, who was the husband of Chaya Rivka Strickman. So it doesn't, as Adele said, there are 19 Dan Orens. There could be 1900 Chaya Strickmans, but it doesn't hurt to look at it first. So if you were to click on this, it would take you to the Genie database, which normally they charge you to get into it. But if you get through this route, you can get to this part of it for free. And then when I look to this one, in fact, it has information about Ovadia. It tells you about the immediate family. His wife was Chaya. He was the husband of Chaya Rivka Strickman. You click on that, and then it takes you to another page where, lo and behold, it has that same photograph that the woman gave to me. So that was the way I knew that I found the right one. What probably happened was one of her cousins had gone to this database, had gotten this photograph, and sent it to her. So now I'm back at the same place. And now I can find out all kinds of information about her. She's a female. We don't have her birth date. We have her death date. It tells where she died, where she's buried. This one's in Warsaw, Poland. Who her immediate family was, daughter of, wife of, mother of. Tells you who posted that. And then here, you don't always get so lucky, but in this case, they have posted the text that's written on her tombstone in Hebrew to learn more about her. So you could then find your friend who's a Hebrew scholar, or if you don't have time to find that friend, you can copy it and paste it into Google Translate, and usually get a reasonably good translation of what is on the tombstone. For Poland work, and I'll talk outside Poland as well, but there's a great website called jri-poland.org. Again, this will be on the page, Jewish Records Indexing Poland. If I looked her name up on there, I put in for Chaya Strickman, and now I know she's Warsaw. I'd put her in for being from Warsaw. It finds no matching records from her. But let's look at her again. And if I put in a Chaya Strickman that isn't from Warsaw, sometimes you can search for too much. You can look, say, I'm looking for Chaya Strickman from Warsaw, and for some reason it can't find it. Be persistent, go back. Let me just try Chaya Strickman. So if I just put in Chaya Strickman, all of a sudden it shows up. They have one person from Lublin, one from Lvov, which is now Lviv in Ukraine, 3 from Radom, 8 from Volhynia, and 1 from Warsaw. So now all of a sudden, the Warsaw one is showing up. And if I click on that one from Warsaw, it gives me a link to this other database, and I can click on that, and it takes me back again to the same information that we saw elsewhere. The very same photograph, basic information. Here it tells you also exactly what part of the cemetery it's located in. You don't always have that, but for this cemetery, it has been mapped, just like the New Haven cemeteries, and it tells you the date of death. And if you happen to be in that cemetery, it would tell you where exactly to walk to find it. They have on that website, here again, you have to be careful. And I'm going to come back to this in a few times. Here, the name Strickman is written Strikeman. Names are not, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it's important when thinking about names, think about different spellings of the same name, because we change our name ourselves, our parents may change the name, and there are secretaries, administrators, typists, volunteers like all of us who might type something into an online database and might get it wrong. So typos happen. So here, if I want to learn more, it said, back on the previous site, it said that you could look up and find it's on the second, where it says Warsaw, on the top line, she's in the Warsaw Okopowa Cemetery. So if I were to take that name and put it into Google and click on that website, they have a map of that whole cemetery. So if you want to find out which sector she was in, we have the number, and you're visiting in Poland, it tells you exactly where to go. And so here it said she's in the cemetery, the section which I've outlined there, and you could go there, and if you were lucky, you would actually find that individual tombstone. As Adele and Mark, who were with me on a cemetery cleaning trip, you don't always find the tombstones as neatly cleaned as the New Haven Jewish Cemetery keeps our cemeteries. But if you're lucky, it will be cleaned. Another thing, step 2, prepare basic records for key ancestors. If you haven't done this already and you're interested in doing it, I would start by just on one piece of paper, write down your basic family tree. So that starts with you, your mom, your dad, the grandparents, your 4 grandparents, and if you're lucky enough to know them, most of us don't know all 8 of our great-grandparents. Either we may know their first names, we may not, we may know their last names, we may not. But write down whatever you do know on a piece of paper like this, and then that can serve as a framework for what you're going to do later. A little bit about the scientific method. What is the scientific method? You can look it up in the dictionary. Scientific method is a noun. One definition is it's a method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. Criticism is the backbone of the scientific method. When I worked on my book about Yale, I was very fortunate to work with George Wilson Pearson, who was already a professor emeritus, but the historian of Yale. And when I shared with him drafts of chapters that I was writing, he came back to me challenging me on almost every single thing I wrote. Not saying, Dan, you're wrong. He came back to me and he said, Dan, how do you know this? How can you justify it? Put footnotes, put your sources. So, the president of Harvard really got into an embarrassing situation for many reasons, one of which was not giving proper sources for documentation. Sources are so important for everything that we do, because what they do is they give you when you have sources. I mean, you don't have to publish the sources unless you're in an academic press, but keep the sources for yourself, because they will give you confidence and help you justify what you think is true, because not everything any of us think is true may be true. We may think it with the best of intentions, but the more sources, the more support, the more confidence that we can have about going forward. Be patient, persistent, be prepared for rejection. Some of the things you think may turn out to be wrong. Trust other sources. In other words, I'm not encouraging people to believe in conspiracy theories, but not everything you read on the internet is true. There are lots of honest mistakes. We are all humans. We all make mistakes. Everything that gets on the internet until AI takes over. Well, AI we know makes lots of mistakes. So the internet provides great sources, great places to start to explore. But go back and try and check to be sure that it was typed in correctly, properly. Look for multiple sources, compare and contrast. Note that people may have multiple given names. My name is Dan, but people, at my bar mitzvah, they gave me my bar mitzvah certificate made out to Daniel Oren. I had to hand it back to the rabbi and say, this isn't me, so they came up with the rabbi. Many people have multiple surnames. People will change their names. Look for original sources where you can. Write down your sources, because it may well be that a year or two later you may think that you knew something about someone, but now you're not so sure because cousin Ethel says something totally different, and you want to go back to find out how you found out, so you can see if Ethel really may be right, or you're right, or maybe there's some other explanation. And be open to foreign languages, even if we're not expert in foreign languages ourselves. Don't be scared of them, because particularly in this day and age, there are lots of ways to get foreign text translated. Precision counts. I can't tell you how many people have written me letters addressed to Dear Oren. Well, yeah, Oren's my last name, but my first name isn't Oren. And again, I've gotten many Dear Daniel letters. The most famous one, I was once introduced by a friend. This was a joke, but I was introduced at a lecture I was giving at Yale Medical School, and he said, the next speaker is Dan Oren, and then he flashed this slide on the screen from 2004, talking about how conductor Daniel Oren was arrested at the Metropolitan Opera moments after finishing Bohème, and then it went on to talk about Daniel Oren, 49, was arrested after for failing to pay child support. Well, thank God I haven't had to deal with child support, and this isn't me, and I've never led a production of Bohem. But just because you see the same name, as Adele pointed out, doesn't mean it's the same person you're thinking of. All right, a case study of the scientific method. Somebody in a class I taught last year in geology came to me and was trying to find out all that she could about her ancestor Samuel Guns. She was very interested in this because on one website she found that it listed his name as Samuel Guns and Samuel Ettinger. And my wife Jeanette does have ancestors from the same city of Tarnow by the name of Ettinger. So the woman thought that her ancestor Samuel Guns must have been related to Jeanette. So what we did was we decided, let's explore the original records. And I was immediately suspicious, was Guns his real name? Because how many of you know someone whose last name is Guns, G-U-N-S, someone Jewish? If it is a real name, it's certainly a very uncommon one. I never say never, anything is possible, but this was uncommon. So we explored, and so using the JRI Poland website, I put in the name Samuel Guns, and lo and behold, it does show up. Might be a little out of focus, but the name G-U-N-S, Samuel Guns, does show up. So what do you do next? In this case, let's go to the original record. And on some websites, you are able to go to the original record. This has a link to it. This was from the town of Tarnow when it was part of Austria, the Austrian Empire. And if you look up the particular record that it sends it to you, I'll blow it up. You can see on the right side, the left side is the birth record of Samuel, but when you look at the name Guns on the right side, whoever typed that in, typed in G-U-N-S. Does anyone else read it differently, perhaps? Gans. Now, how many of you has ever known a Jewish person or family with the name Gans or something close to that? Exactly. So it's probably was a typo when it was put on the internet. Again, we haven't proven anything yet, but it would be much more like, how do we know that, or how can we know that? If I put into this JRI Poland, you can do a search for all of the Guns family from this Tarnow. So again, the odds are if there's one person from a town with a certain last name, there will have been some other vital record from another person. It turns out from the town of Tarnow, which is part of the Krakow province at that time, there is only one person listed in it from the database. But if you put in the name Gans, G-A-N-S from Tarnow, there are 69 records from that city in the same database. So I would be much more confident that we're talking about the Gans family here. And in fact, it probably was that this person she thought was her relative was a Samuel Gans. Step 4, prepare electronically. Before PCs, we all did this, or those of us doing it did it by hand on index cards or on paper. There is no good reason not to do this on the internet, either on your own program or with an online application at this time. I'll take you through a few of them. They have different advantages. The reason is that when you get to more than a few people, it gets hard to keep track of things in a neat way with papers and index cards. But the computer programs can do it much more easily. There's a popular online program called Family Tree Maker, which you can also buy just for your PC or for your Macintosh. There's a program on the Macintosh called Reunion. There are also online trees where the whole thing is kept online. The different companies you may have heard of include Genie, which I mentioned, Genie.com, Ancestry.com, and MyHeritage.com. They're all good companies. I'm not taking a stand one way or another. The big question that you may want to ask yourself, some people don't like having all of their personal data shown on the internet, and the reality is anything that you put on the internet can and probably at some point will become known everywhere. So You may choose just to keep it privately on your own computer rather than on the internet, but that's really your own personal decision. Communication. In this day and age when it is inexpensive, it's free it's very cheap to speak to anyone almost anywhere in the world. If you don't have Skype, or you don't have FaceTime, or you don't have WhatsApp, or some way to speak to people in faraway places, including, especially outside the United States, I would encourage you to get that, because it really makes a difference when you can call up a relative in London or a relative in Poland who may speak English, and be making that call for free, or for 2 cents a minute. It really opens things up. So this is again you put together your table. This is using the program Reunion, and here I've showed back to my original family tree. I put in my ancestor Abraham, I put in no surname, ancestor Sarah, and I put in what I think were the days of birth. Here it lists them in BC. If I had my choice, I'd write BCE, but this program only does BC. It calculates how old they live to. You put in the name of the parent, the name of the child, and what a program like this allows you to keep track of any relative very easily. Step 4, where do you store your documents? Paper files, you can still keep in an old-fashioned paper file, but you may want to scan them and have a backup, because fires happen, losses happen, so and even on a computer, make a backup. Anything we do electronically, with a hard drive, the statement is that I always say is, it's not a question of if your hard drive will die, but when it will die. They are not made to last forever. So it's always good to have at least one backup copy on a separate hard drive, or online on something like Dropbox. Let me skip the next point. Step 5. Identify key living relatives, and this is often the source of stories. Sometimes you'll find stories online, but many of your relatives are online. And my advice to each one of you here is, if you're starting this tomorrow, identify who are the key and the oldest of your living relatives that you can communicate with, because we're not around forever, they won't be around forever, so speak to them while you still can. For my wife Jeanette's family, in about 2011, I was introduced to one of her distant cousins, Lilo Leiser. My wife's family, one line was the Leisers of Nesvichinsky. This is a photo that she sent me. She was about 91 years old at the time, about 2 years before she died. Of her in Buenos Aires, and so I never got to meet her in person, but she had an aide who was really technologically very, very astute, and so we were able to speak by Skype and by email back and forth to trade documents, and she opened up a world of family relatives to us. Step 6, the first time you're meeting a new relative, consider doing a survey interview. Your first goal really is not to ask their whole life story, particularly if it's a distant relative. They may be a stranger, they may not be comfortable with sharing the whole life story, but just get to meet them, and then consider going back for follow-up. If the informant is good, your mother, or of course, or a sister, or a cousin, and your relationship is good, you can ask all the questions right up front. Some case studies. This is my wife Jeanette, a photo born in 1961, a photo of her late mother, Gabrielle, born Taubenschlag, that was her name back in Berlin, Germany. Family changed it to Townsend when they escaped to the U.S. in '39, and her married name was Cohen. We were interested in learning about that family history. This is a photo showing Gaby's father, Heinz Townsend, in Germany, Taubenschlag, but we really didn't know much about his ancestry. So what I encourage everyone to do is, as part of the scientific method, start with a hypothesis, or start with a question. Families, as you get out, we may, even those of us in small families, if you go back, we're probably part of big families somewhere along the line, and it's very easy to get distracted. So since you can't pursue every subject all at once, or every line all at once, sometimes think of a particular thing you want to start out with. So one question we had was, who were the ancestors of Jeanette's grandfather, Heinz Taubenschlag? Here again, as an example, Google was amazing. I just put in to Google Heinz Taubenschlag genealogy. And sometimes you get lucky, and it turned out, well, the first thing that shows up was Heinz. The Heinz ketchup family shows up, Henry John Heinz. The first 3 listings about him. But the 4th listing happened to be Rudolf Jacob Simonis collection, and it lists a Heinz Taubenschlag from Berlin. Now, again, there could be multiple ones, but we knew that Jeanette's grandfather came from Berlin, and I clicked on this, and it took me to the Leo Beck Institute website in New York, and from that opened up a whole window. Most of us have someone in our family who's like the family genealogist. You may be becoming it soon. Sometimes you get lucky, and a few generations back, there was also a family genealogist. And in this case, Jeanette's grandfather, when he was living back in Berlin in the 1920s, had commissioned a genealogist, Simonis was his name, to research his family's history. And those records happen to be in New York at the Leo Beck Institute. So those records, and with the help of the archivist, and I don't know where Jacob is still here, but archivists are, there you are, Jacob. Archivists can do amazing things for all of us sometimes. So he was able to help go from Heinz, Jeanette's grandfather, back 4 generations in finding family names. We also found, and this is an important thing, sometimes names may not match up. We had, Jeanette knew that her grandfather's first given name, his first name was Isidore, but then a cousin of hers said that there was someone in the family named Judah or Yehuda. And so we had these Isidore and Yehuda. Well, of course, for so many people, we have first names, middle names. Jews often have a secular name, a local language name, and a Hebrew name. So it turned out from this, we were able to find out that Isidore and Judah were the same person, Isidore Yehuda. So another source, JewishGen.org. This is a photo of my great-grandfather, Ephraim Meisels. He was a wheat merchant who lived in Lublin, Poland, and we know that he died, he was killed in the Shoah during the Holocaust. I didn't know that much about him. We had this, my mother had a photograph of her grandfather, and we had this. And then came up the question. So there's a website called JewishGen.org, which I use all the time, to get full access. It's free to everybody, but you can get more access to more sophisticated questions if you pay $100 for a year. So for some of these websites, it's worth paying for it, and you don't have to keep it for more than a year. Keep it for a year, use that website, and the next year maybe spend that $100 again, which is a lot of money, not on the same one, but some other website. So in that case, we paid. If you put in his name and put in a surname and put in sounds like, because there may be different spellings, put in the given name, sounds like Ephraim. I knew he was from Poland, from Lublin, put in all those things. And here it came up with 144 records that might match. But you click on it, and again, some of the work takes time, but eventually we were able to find among them. Here's these 178 records. I should say things change over time. This was a search from 2021. There were 144 records. I did that 2 years later, 2023. By then there were up to 178 records that might have matched. So the results you find today, you may find more down the line. But going through those, eventually I found one that did match. Here he's listed. They typed it in. The language used was Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew. So the Latinization letters are not always the same. But here it's spelled M-E-J-Z-E-L. They have his name written as Freim, the Yiddish version of Ephraim. So you have to be open to like as they used to say in England, think. Dress British, think Jewish, or something like that. So you have to be able to go both ways. What was it?
Look British, think Yiddish.
Okay. But we can look at him, and from those records we were able to find his parents, so I was able to get back another generation in the family, and in fact, great-grandparents. Now, I wanted to check the original, so I again encourage people to check the original. This is in the original Polish that the language was written in. This is very difficult to read in, but there are websites. There's a wonderful Facebook group called Genealogical Translations, where if you ask nicely and post something that you find, some wonderful volunteers will translate it for you. This website, when I was looking for him, also had links to Yad Vashem. We knew he had been killed in the Holocaust. The Yad Vashem database, you type in the name of someone you may think have been killed there and where they're from, and here it comes up with a list of 5 different links of possible people. And in this case, they're all referring to the same person. But you go through it, and Yad Vashem has testimonies that after the Holocaust, people recorded of relatives who were killed. And this one happened to be filled out in Hebrew, but Yad Vashem is also now translating them so that from the website you can find English translations. Another thing you can do, there's something called the JewishGen Family Finder, which you can look for other people who might be searching for measles. So in this case, for measles from Lublin, here I click on it, well, it tells me that I'm searching for it already. That didn't help me, but you never know. Step 7, prepare for brick walls. There was a famous line from the Talmud where Rabbi Tarfon says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, which means it's not your obligation to complete the task. He goes on to say, but it's still your duty to, you're not free to desist from it either. But I quote the first part because just because you run into a brick wall, don't let that defeat you. Go work on a different project. Come back to it in later years. Through the JewishGen Family Finder search, and I talk about this in my wedding photo book, I had a side of my father's family, which we had a photo, and we knew the names of, this is me, my late father, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. We knew, and even to this day, because all of us are still learning, my great-great-grandmother, I don't know her last name yet, but we knew her first name, and the photo also had a picture of my great-great-grandmother, whose first name and last name I don't even know. But through this family finder where you put in looking for other people who may be searching for the same family, in this case, Schweitzers from Vilnius, from Lithuania, and here I had to type, sometimes you have to look up how is a city called. We knew the family was from Vilna, but today it's spelled Vilnius, so you have to type in the right name. We're able to find today 5 different people who are happening to study the Schweitzer family from Vilnius, Lithuania. Carmen Melamed listed at the bottom. She has since passed away, but she was a distant cousin of mine that I knew. But there was a guy named Sam Schweitzer who also was looking, and it turned out I did this before it was on the internet when it was only with paper databases, but one day I got a phone call based on this family finder where a man from New Jersey named Sam Schweitzer calls me on the phone, and he knows that he's a descendant of his grandfather Avram Schweitzer, and the whole Schweitzer family was lost during the Holocaust except for his grandfather. And then he starts talking about the distant relatives, and he starts talking about how his grandfather had a sister named Sarah Schweitzer, who had a father named Chaim Schweitzer. And then he goes on to start talking about how his grandfather Abraham had a brother named Ariel, a sister named Bela, a brother named Shalom, a brother named Pesach. And when you start to hear all of these coincidences, we were eventually able to prove it with 99.99% accuracy, this was the same family. And it turned out that his ancestor, Abraham, had got stuck in Europe during the war, while the rest of the family before the war had migrated to Israel. So this led to their line of the family thinking that they had no relatives left in the world. We were able to have a family reunion in 1995 in New Jersey. And this is Harry Schweitzer, whose father was Abraham, and again, who had lived from 1945 to 1995, thinking that he was the last of the Schweitzers. And he actually just passed away last year. So sometimes you can discover families and make a difference. Sometimes when you do your work and you start to share it with others, and I'll share with you a community in a minute, when other people start to learn you're looking for Schweitzers from Vilna, a fellow genealogist who I spoke with said, you know, I just saw a document from World War I, which had a Schweitzer. I also mentioned the name was Horobrovitskaya. That was the name of my great-grandmother, her married name, before she changed it, before she got married and changed it to Schweitzer. But anyways, they had a record of her from World War I Vilnius that he sent to me. During World War I in Vilnius, the city was under siege from the Germans, so there was terrible typhus and terrible disease. So half the Jewish community died there just from the suffering from the cramped quarters, the unavailability of food and medicine. But they had a list that still exists from today showing the records from the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, part of the money that we give to Federation. Part of that was being sent to that community during the war to help sustain single mothers. My great-grandmother at that time, her husband was a soldier in the Tsar's army, so she was effectively, during World War I, a single mother raising kids at home. But this record, which has her name in Russian, Sura Khorobrovitskaya, she was getting 2 rubles and 25 kopecks a month. And I have no doubt that she and her family lived through the war. And I'm here today because of that support. So every year when the Federation comes and asks me to give some money, it adds another layer. There are probably some of our ancestors, whether we had some rich ancestors or poor ancestors, we all surely had some poor ancestors along the way. There's a decent chance that they're here because of charity given back then. So this is very reinforcing to me. Another source of information. This is Bart Giamatti. Bart is not Jewish, but he was a New Havener and a good friend of the Jewish community. So I'll just show one thing that one can learn with his family. Through the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island website. If you go to Genie.com, you could find that Bart was born in 1938. And if you wanted to translate his ancestry, his father was a man, Valentine John Giamatti, and he followed the links on the Genie website. It tells you that his father, Valentine, was born in New Haven, died in Florida in 1982. It has Valentine's father, that's Bart Giamatti's grandfather, Angelo Giamatti. Click on it, and there it tells you that he was born in Italy and came to the U.S. So if you want to find out how did my ancestors get into the U.S., if they came through Ellis Island, there's a decent chance that there were records there. You go to this website, put in Angelo Giamatti, it comes up with 2. One is Angelo B. Well, that's Bart Giamatti, who shows that he was on a boat coming into Massachusetts in 55. But the Angelo we're interested in came to the U.S. in 1911 on a ship called the Cleveland, and it says that his last place of residence was Mantegua, Italy. And you can look, it gives a lot of biographical information about him, and then check the records. In this case, it takes you to the ship's manifest, where he happens to be listed on this page as the 3rd person on that page. And if you zoom in, it gives you the information, how old he was, where in Italy he was coming from, who he was going to visit. It said who was going to go to live with. In this case, it said his brother. And you look up here the name of the city, and you look at here, and you see that he's from Mantegua, which is what's typed in. So in order to prepare for this talk, I just wanted to see where exactly in Italy is Mantegua located. So I put that into the internet, and Google can't find it. And it turns out that, this may be hard to read, but can anyone read this differently? Montagna, M-O-N-T-A-G-N-A. So this was, again, another example of, now I'm not saying this is not easy to read. And sometimes when you're looking at an old document, it's worth looking not just at the line about the person you're interested in, but lots of lines to get a sense of the handwriting, if it's handwritten. And whoever entered this on the database changed, I'm sure they were meaning well, but they didn't read it the right way and they put in the wrong thing. I'll skip through. There's another website, Ancestry.com, which provides great information. This is one of those paid websites. A word about, as I'm coming to the end, DNA testing. For most of us, there are a few popular DNA companies. There's 23andMe, there's MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, Ancestry DNA. For most of us, we're not going to learn. You're not going to learn more from DNA than you're going to learn from doing the old-fashioned online work or going to archives of finding out who your relatives were. But there are some exceptions. I mean, sometimes you'll find fifth cousins and things like that, but each week I get something from 23andMe and my heritage DNA with a list of 30 new relatives they've found for me. So they've found for me over the last few years hundreds and hundreds of relatives that they say are my relatives. So far, I've only been able to prove that 2 of them are really my relatives. They're not perfect things. Where they are potentially very useful is if you're adopted, or if you have someone in the family who's adopted, or you think there's been some hanky-panky in the generations along the way. There they provide tremendous information. One question always, again, these are not free to pay or not to pay. I had resisted for years getting DNA testing because I didn't trust the DNA companies to keep my data confidential. I still don't trust them, and you read from time to time things go wrong. But a few years ago, my daughter noticed that one of the companies, 23andMe, was having a Christmas sale, 2 for 1. And so she wanted to do it for her and me. And of course, when your kid gets interested in genealogy, it's hard to say no to them. So I did that, and that's how I got online with that, although I still don't share all my details online. As I said, it's good very much for adoptee searches. So in fact, with the Samuel Gunn story, we were able to find out that the person was adopted, but not biologically related to the ancestry. Sometimes it's a fun thing. It'll tell you about your ancestry. This is my results from 23andMe. It says I'm 99.3% Ashkenazi from Central Europe and Western Ukraine. From those areas, I'm 0.4% Eastern European, broadly European, 0.3%. What I will tell you with these DNA results is that anything less than 2% usually doesn't mean much of anything, because there's lots of random noise. But they're pretty good for the big percentages. Or if you, sometimes people will often find, oh, I have 25% Jewish ancestry, 75% Irish or something like that, and they will try and research genealogy because they said they never knew they had a Jewish ancestor. But if someone has, if 25% shows up, you can be pretty sure that one of the grandparents was Jewish, or 2 of the great-grandparents were Jewish. And then sometimes you have fun things, like I have less than 2% Neanderthal DNA, but we all probably have a little bit. I'm going to wrap up saying something about the Jewish Genealogical Society of Connecticut. There's a wonderful organization. Again, this website is listed. It's a society devoted entirely to Jewish genealogy. Their next program is actually next week. This next program is all online. Genealogy is a team sport. We can all do stuff on our own, but it's something that we all will do better by sharing with others and getting ideas from others, either by talking to them or by joining an online genealogy Facebook group if you're into that. There is a great conference that's going to be held annually of Jewish genealogy societies from all over the world. And this year it's close by in Philadelphia, August 18th to the 22nd. They always have a good number of introductory lectures, so that it's really good for all levels, and people are really happy to share with you information and answer questions and to find partnerships. There are people who volunteer to do translations there. A book, if you want to read, is Getting Started in Jewish Genealogy by Gary Mokotov, published 3 years ago. My book, The Wedding Photo, is a collection of family stories and how I did that for my family and my wife's family. I was invited, I brought a few copies here with me today. It sells on Amazon for $40, but since I can get it straight from the publisher, it will sell here for $30 today, and all profits from today will go as a donation to the Jewish Historical Society of Greater New Haven. So I've talked for a long time. You've been very patient. If there's time, I'll open it up for a few questions. First, please.
I wanted to ask if you know when they start. I have done some research into my son's family, and I have a bunch of the manifests from when they come in through Ellis Island, and when my grandparents
Repeat. Yeah, the question is, I didn't hear every word, but basically there are ships manifest that when people come through from Europe or wherever the old country was, it would record biographical details about them, including their race or nationality. And there are different entry sites, but it changed in different years depending on the climate. Certainly, as America became much more racially conscious in the 1910s, that started to be done much more often. But you can go back and find older records as well. I should say something about ships manifests and the myth of name changes. There's the old joke of, which you've all heard, about the person who says that their name is Shane Ferguson, the Jewish guy, and they ask how to get it, and to make a long story short, they said it was changed at Ellis Island when his great-grandfather was asked, what is your name? And the great-grandfather doesn't speak English very well, so he answers in Yiddish, Shane Ferguson, completely forgot. And so the official at Ellis Island writes down, Shane Ferguson. The truth is, nobody's name was changed at Ellis Island. It's a great joke. It is a great story that we tell each other. And half of our families, if not all of our families, may be living with that story that my grandparents changed their name, or the official changed their name at Ellis Island. Think of who works at Ellis Island. The people who work at Ellis Island, they're government officials. If you wanted to change your name today, how would you do it? Any of us? The people still change names every day. You go to a court. A judge can issue an official document to change the name. The people, the administrative staff at Ellis Island did not have the legal authority and did not change people's names. Now obviously people did change the names. I mean, probably half of us have families that changed their name, but it would be done either back in the old country, or much more commonly they would go to a court in America. And there are it's beyond today's talk, but there are lots of documents available where you can look up to see what a name was changed to. What's more likely is that someone had a family member that was, I'm making up names now, that in the old country was Farbissen. They came to the United States. After they settled here, they changed the name to Frost. Then a few years later, their brother came from the old country to here on the ship's manifest. And the ship's manifest were written by officials in the old country. The people at Ellis Island wrote down the same official name that was on the ship's manifest. After the person came to America, they may have started using their brother's name of Frost, and then somewhere along the way got around to making it legal. But there is no evidence that names were actually changed at Ellis Island itself. Adele.
You had talked about earlier about public versus private when you're using some of these organizations. If you keep your information private, does that mean nobody else can see it? So are you limited as to who might say, oh, I'm seeing this thing, maybe they're related to me? Or when you say public, does that mean like anybody just doing a search?
Yeah. So for example, on 23andMe, you can set it so that it has your DNA records, and it will tell you what percent Neanderthal you are, what percent Italian, what percent Irish, what percent Ashkenazi, what percent this or that, and you can set it so that no one has access to it. You can also set it so that it will look for people who are related to you, and then they can find out that you are potentially related, and they will, some people want to use it just for getting their DNA background. Some people want to use it to find relatives, and they may choose to open it up. You can also choose, and again, it's a lot sometimes to keep track of, because you have to say, do you want to share it or not? You can choose not to be listed as Adele Messina. You can choose to be listed as AM. So then this potential relative could get in touch with you and just click on AM, and then it's up to you if you message or email back and forth whether you share your name. On the big company online trees like Ancestry.com, for example. You can choose to put your whole tree on Ancestry.com and give no one access besides you in the world to it. Or if you have a relative you want to share with, you can give them a code to get in to access that. Or you can open it up to the world or to individual people you want. So you can control the privacy. Yeah, question.
My wife's family name is Romanov, and it came from Russia. And for years and years, I've heard stories about how one of the Romanovs was a doctor who serviced the Tsar, and this is how, you know, they came up with the name. They were given permission to use the Romanov name. How would I actually get more information about that?
Yeah, so it's one of those stories that's possibly true. It could also not be true. A lot of people would take names, like in Germany, people would take names of the city they were living in, or the nobleman who owned the city that they were living in. You'd probably, so if you think there's the doctor, in a lot of the legal documents, a lot of birth records, death records, marriage records, it will record not just the person's name, but their occupation. So you can try and see if you can find there is some record of an ancestor who had that occupation. Certainly if they were a doctor in the Tsar's court, it probably would be listed. They probably would have been a prominent person. That's the kind of thing which also you might, if you can't find anyone in the records who is a doctor, you could try and consult a professional historian about that. Please.
I do a lot of research, and something that might help other people with Find a Grave or with the cemetery. If you have primary sources and you see a mistake on a website, and you can share those primary sources information, you can get a mistake corrected. And I've done that on Find a Grave as well as particular cemetery that had an ancestor there.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll just repeat it. Basically saying she's done a lot of work, and if she finds a mistake, for many websites, if you send it in, I mean, they're doing it to be a public service, so if you report to them that's an error, they will often correct it. And don't expect it always to happen overnight that the correction is made, but yeah, if you find a mistake.
You have to provide the documentation, though.
Yeah, and you have to provide the sources.
Yeah, and you shared with us a cemetery in Poland that was well maintained.
Yeah.
Is there any way of knowing which cemeteries are still around and searchable in Eastern Europe?
Yeah. What I always tell with regard to Poland, but it's true through most of the world, every cemetery has its own story too. Each person has its own story. So I would start with that. I mentioned JOWBR, the Jewish Online Worldwide Burial Record, which is part of the JewishGen database. They're the best first place to look for cemeteries around the world, and if they have photographs, they will share with you. So sometimes I find also doing just a Google search, if you know the town, put in the town Tarnopol Jewish Cemetery, that's in Ukraine, and there's a decent chance that it'll link you to some information about that cemetery. I should also say there are, from most parts of the world, there are research groups, many of them are affiliated with JewishGen, where if you contact that group, and you can find out that group either through Facebook or through the JewishGen.org website, the people who run the groups are thrilled when somebody contacts them for information, so you can often contact them and gain them as a partner in your search to find that information. I'm happy with Poland, I'm happy to be a partner with anyone, but I can also try and refer you for other places. Please.
The one thing I wanted to share, my husband's family was from Germany. They got out in 1938. And we had an opportunity to go and visit the towns that his parents were from. And through the help of the late Werner Hirsch, who was one of
on that point, I would, so you were talking about how you went back to your husband's town of origin in Germany and found a lot of support in the archives and from people in the cemetery. There are a lot of places, I mean, obviously our people has known a lot of suffering in Europe and the Shoah, especially in recent decades, but even in some of the darkest places in Europe, there are good people who are doing what they can to preserve Jewish history. And sort of as like a second or a third level of your genealogical quest, I would encourage exploring the idea of going back to the town. This doesn't, there are still anti-Semites in the world. I'm not pretending everything is good, but there are also good people, and your presence there can make a difference. Adele and Mark shared with me, 7, 8 years ago already. We went to clean a cemetery in Markusha, a little town where I had some great grandparents from outside of Lublin, and one effect, and sometimes was that the cemetery had been abandoned for 70 years since the Shoah, since the Holocaust, and the town just sort of ignored it, and some of the people would say, Harumph, why don't the Jews do a better job of taking care of their burial places? And well, we know the answer. We know why they don't, or why they didn't. But when they saw that there were Jews who were coming back to take care of it and had interest in that town, it made a difference. And I've gone back on a couple other occasions since then. And in some towns, there are people, when they see that we care about this, they start to take an interest. And so in that same town, and I don't think I've told you this, Adele or Mark, this past summer, the town secretary, the town administrator, who you met when we were there, and there's a new mayor, but the two of them got together a group of 7 people, construction guys and workers and gardening people, and in one day, they cleaned the whole cemetery. It was in much better shape, because of the work we had done to clean it. But what happened is they began to take an interest in it themselves. And I sent them afterwards like $40 to buy beers for each other. So it's a bargain. You pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for the bargaining, but they start to see it as part of their history. And so and there are many people throughout Eastern Europe. I'm not saying the majority, I'm saying, but there are many individuals who are doing good things to preserve our history and see it as part of their history. So building those relationships, it doesn't always happen, but building them really makes a difference. Thank you all for your interest.
Thank you, Dan. And again, if anybody is interested in purchasing one of the wedding photo books, Dan has them available, and he has generously given us, will be giving us the proceeds for the Jewish Historical Society. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially those who worked on this event, Adele Messina.
I'll still answer the call.
Ita Kaplan, Marjorie Drucker, Mimi Glenn, Bob Kaplan, Jake Rosenberger, who's our archivist, and Harold Miller, who has made sure that the checks go where they have to go. So thank you all. And remember the event that we're planning on March 3rd at the New Haven Museum to pay tribute to Laurel Vlock, a local personality and pioneer in the filmmaking industry. So please join us, and thank you again. There's a lot of food back there. Please help yourselves to it, and we hope to see you again.
And I just wanted to add that, so this was part of the Judaica project. It's a little bit of a different topic than what we've been doing. You can find our previous programs, and you'll find this one as well, recorded on our YouTube channel, and there's a link on our website. In addition to the March 3rd program, the next Judaica Project program is March 11th, I think. It's the second Thursday in March, with Dan's wife, Jeanette, on
14th.
The 14th, okay, on Jewish art and graphic design, and that should be really interesting. And Jeanette is the designer of the 2021 to 2023 Hanukkah stamp from the Postal Service. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much.